The security camera notification pinged on my phone at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Motion detected in the master bedroom. I paused my review of the Henderson Vorsinez case file, expecting to see our housekeeper, Maria, finishing her weekly cleaning routine. What I saw instead made my blood turn to ice. My husband Derek was standing at my jewelry box, my grandmother's diamond necklace dangling from his fingers like a guilty secret. He wasn't admiring it or cleaning it. He was photographing it with his phone, comparing it to something on his screen, then carefully placing it into a small velvet pouch. The same pouch I'd seen him hide in his briefcase 3 weeks ago when I'd interrupted his packing for what he claimed was a business trip. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat frozen in my chambers at the county courthouse, watching my marriage implode in real time through grainy security footage. 23 years of building a life together, and this was how I discovered who Derek Morrison really was. Not through a dramatic confrontation or suspicious behavior, but through cold, digital evidence that he was systematically stealing from me. The irony wasn't lost on me. As a family court judge, I'd presided over countless divorce cases involving financial infidelity. I'd listened to sob stories of hidden assets, secret accounts, and stolen heirlooms. I'd always prided myself on seeing through deception, on being able to read people's true intentions. Yet here I was, the fool who'd been blind to the thief sleeping in my own bed. Derek had no idea about the security system I'd installed 6 months ago. As far as he knew, our home was protected only by the basic alarm system we'd had for years. But after presiding over a particularly disturbing stalking case, I'd quietly upgraded our security with hidden cameras throughout the house. The installation company had been discreet, the cameras invisible, and the monitoring app accessible only through my encrypted phone. I'd installed them to protect us from external threats. I never imagined I'd need protection from the man I'd pledged to love and honor. My hands trembled as I scrolled back through the recorded footage. The theft wasn't a recent development. Derek had been at this for months, maybe longer. Each time I traveled for judicial conferences, each time I worked late at the courthouse, he'd been methodically photographing and removing pieces from my collection. My mother's pearl earrings, the sapphire bracelet I'd inherited from my aunt, the vintage Cartier watch that had been my law school graduation gift to myself. I'd noticed some pieces were missing, of course, but Derek always had explanations. The pearls were at the jeweler for cleaning, the bracelet was in the safe at the bank. The watch was being repaired. I'd trusted him completely, never thinking to verify his stories. After all, we shared everything. Our home, our finances, our lives. Why would my husband lie about my own jewelry? The answer was becoming clearer with each frame of security footage I reviewed. Derek wasn't just borrowing or moving my jewelry. He was documenting it, photographing it from every angle, researching its value. This wasn't careless handling or absent-minded relocation. This was premeditation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek himself. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I glanced at the live security feed and saw our empty bedroom, the jewelry box sitting innocently on my dresser. Derek was indeed working late, but not in the way he'd claimed. According to the location services I could access through our shared family plan, he was across town at an address I didn't recognize. I pulled up the property records database I had access to through the court system. The address belonged to a high-end pawn shop called Prestige Estate Buyers. My heart sank as the pieces fell into place. Derek wasn't just stealing my jewelry, he was selling it. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never truly known the man I'd shared my life with. Derek Morrison, successful pharmaceutical sales director, devoted husband, pillar of our community. The man who brought me coffee every morning, who attended every one of my judicial award ceremonies, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral and celebrated every promotion in my career. That man was apparently a facade, hiding someone who could systematically rob his own wife while looking her in the eye every morning and professing his love. I forced myself to think like a judge rather than a betrayed wife. Evidence. Documentation. Proof. The security footage was just the beginning. If Derek had been selling my jewelry, there would be financial records, transaction histories, paper trails that even the most careful criminal couldn't completely erase. My chambers felt suddenly claustrophobic, the weight of my judicial robes heavy on my shoulders. I'd built my reputation on fairness, on careful consideration of evidence, on understanding the complexities of human relationships and the various ways they could unravel. But this wasn't a case file on my desk. This was my life, my marriage, my trust being methodically dismantled by the person I'd loved most. The security app chimed again. Derek was coming home. I watched through the camera as he entered our bedroom, moving with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself unobserved. He went straight to my jewelry box, his fingers dancing over the remaining pieces with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. This time, he selected my grandmother's engagement ring, the one she'd given me on her deathbed, making me promise to pass it down to my own daughter someday. Derek had been there that day, had held my hand as I sobbed over her hospital bed, had helped me plan her funeral. Now he was photographing that sacred ring like it was just another item to be appraised and sold. I had to leave my chambers. If I stayed and watched him desecrate one more piece of my family's legacy, I might do something that would compromise the very careful plan already forming in my mind. Because I was going to have a plan. Derek had made the mistake of stealing from someone who understood the legal system better than he ever could. Someone who had access to resources he couldn't imagine. Someone who knew exactly how to document evidence and build an unshakable case. Derek thought he was robbing a trusting wife. He had no idea he was stealing from a family court judge who'd spent decades learning how to uncover hidden assets and hold people accountable for their deception. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave the courthouse, my mind was already working through the possibilities. Theft from a spouse was still theft. Financial fraud was financial fraud, and the systematic theft of family heirlooms worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. That was a felony, but I wasn't going to call the police. Not yet. Derek had been playing a long game, carefully stealing from me over months or possibly years. I was going to play a longer one. I was going to let him continue his thefts while I built a case so comprehensive, so ironclad, that when I finally revealed the truth, there would be no room for denial, no possibility of plea bargaining, and no chance of escape. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "Miss, can't wait to be home with my beautiful wife." I stared at the message, feeling the last remnants of the woman I'd been this morning crumble away. That woman had been trusting, loving, completely devoted to her marriage. The woman taking her place was someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Because Derek had forgotten one crucial fact in his criminal planning. I wasn't just any wife he was stealing from. I was Judge Catherine Morrison, and I'd built my career on making sure that people who betrayed trust faced the full consequences of their actions. Derek wanted to play games with my jewelry. Fine. But he was about to learn that when you steal from a judge, you're not just committing a crime. You're challenging someone who knows exactly how the justice system works and has the patience to use it to its fullest extent. The drive home was a blur of strategic thinking and suppressed rage. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had the outline of a plan that would take months to execute, but would be absolutely devastating in its completeness. Derek's car was in the garage, the lights in our house warm and welcoming. To any observer, we looked like the perfect suburban couple. The successful judge and her devoted husband, living their American dream in their pristine colonial home. But appearances could be deceiving. Derek had taught me that lesson today. Tomorrow I would begin teaching him one of my own. As I walked up the steps to our front door, my grandmother's engagement ring, probably already listed on some online auction site, I felt something inside me crystallize into cold, pure determination. Derek thought he was getting away with the perfect crime. He had no idea that his victim was about to become his judge, jury, and the architect of his complete downfall. The game was about to begin, and only one of us knew the rules had changed. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Derek asked as I entered our kitchen, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had once made my heart flutter. Now it made my stomach turn. He was standing at the stove, stirring what smelled like his famous pasta sauce, wearing the navy cashmere sweater I'd bought him for his birthday last month. The domestic scene was so perfectly normal, so loving and comfortable, that for a moment I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the security footage. "Almost. Long day in court," I replied, settling my briefcase on the kitchen island with practiced casualness. "The Henderson case is more complex than I initially thought." Derek nodded sympathetically, reaching for the wine glasses. "Red or white tonight?" "Red," I said, watching him pour my favorite Cabernet Sauvignon. The same hands that had been photographing my grandmother's ring an hour ago were now serving me wine with tender attentiveness. "I was thinking," Derek continued, handing me the glass, "maybe we should take that trip to Tuscany we've been talking about. You've been working so hard lately, and I just closed the Morrison account. We could both use some time away." I nearly choked on my wine. The Morrison account. He'd been bragging about landing that pharmaceutical contract for months, claiming it would bring in substantial commission. Was that story true? Or was he planning to fund our romantic getaway with the proceeds from my stolen jewelry? "That sounds wonderful," I managed, forcing a smile. "When were you thinking?" "Next month. I could clear my schedule for 2. His eyes sparkled with what looked like genuine excitement. "We could stay in that villa you showed me online, the one with the wine cellar and the infinity pool. 2 weeks in Italy. Plenty of time for him to clean out the rest of my jewelry collection while I was thousands of miles away, believing we were rekindling our marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. "Let me check my calendar," I said, pulling out my phone. As I pretended to scroll through my judicial schedule, I was actually opening the security app. Derek's back was turned as he stirred the sauce, and I quickly reviewed the afternoon's footage. My blood pressure spiked as I watched him return to the bedroom after our phone conversation, this time selecting my mother's tennis bracelet, the one she'd worn to my law school graduation, the one she'd given me the day I was sworn in as a judge, telling me it would bring me luck in my career. Derek had photographed it from every angle, then slipped it into that same velvet pouch before hiding it in his briefcase. My mother's bracelet was probably sitting in his car right now, waiting to be appraised tomorrow morning. "Earth to Catherine," Derek's voice brought me back to the present. He was standing directly in front of me, concern creasing his handsome features. "You looked like you were a million miles away." "Sorry," I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. "Just thinking about the Tuscany trip. It sounds perfect." Derek beamed, leaning over to kiss my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. "I love you so much, Kat. I know I don't always show it with how busy we both are, but you mean everything to me." The lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that I wondered how many others I'd believed over the years. How many business trips had been cover stories? How many late nights at the office had actually been spent selling my family heirlooms? Dinner was torture. Derek was particularly attentive, asking about my cases, sharing funny stories from his sales calls, discussing plans for our anniversary next month. He seemed genuinely happy, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen him in months. Of course he was relaxed. His financial stress was being alleviated by robbing his own wife. "I have some briefs to review tonight," I said as we finished dessert. "Important hearing tomorrow." "Of course," Derek said, already reaching for the dishes. "I'll clean up. You go work your magic, Your Honor." "Your Honor." He'd been calling me that playfully for years, ever since my appointment to the bench. Now it felt like mockery. Did he think his title as my husband put him above the law, above consequences? He was about to learn otherwise. In my home office, I closed the door and activated the white noise machine I used for confidential phone calls. Then I opened my laptop and began the most important investigation of my career. The first step was financial forensics. Derek and I maintained separate personal accounts alongside our joint household account, but as his spouse, I had legal access to information about his financial activities. What I found in our bank records made my hands shake with rage. Over the past 8 months, Derek had made 18 deposits to his personal account, that couldn't be traced to his pharmaceutical sales commission. The amounts ranged from $1,200 to $8,500, and they corresponded exactly with times when I'd been traveling for judicial conferences or working late on high-profile cases. I cross-referenced the dates with my security footage archives, and the pattern became crystal clear. Every deposit had been preceded by Derek's access to my jewelry box within the previous 48 hours. My Cartier watch, appraised at $12,000, had disappeared on a Tuesday. Derek's bank account showed a $8,500 deposit the following Thursday. My mother's emerald earrings had vanished during my judicial ethics seminar in Chicago. A $3,200 deposit appeared in Derek's account the day I returned. The man was methodical. I had to give him that. He was spacing out the thefts to avoid suspicion, selling items at roughly 70% of their appraised value for quick cash, and depositing the money in amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic bank reporting requirements. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd been doing this long enough to establish a clear pattern, and patterns were exactly what judges were trained to recognize. I opened a new encrypted folder on my laptop and began documenting everything. Screenshots of bank records, timestamps from security footage, photos of the missing jewelry pieces from my insurance documentation. Each piece of evidence was meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. My phone buzzed with a text from my court clerk, Rebecca, reminding me about tomorrow's 9 a.m. hearing. I stared at the message, struck by a sudden realization. Rebecca had been my clerk for 5 years, absolutely trustworthy and discreetly efficient. More importantly, she'd grown up in a family of private investigators, and still maintained connections in that world. I picked up my secure office line and dialed her number. Rebecca, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need a personal favor. Are you still in touch with your cousin Marcus, the private investigator? Of course, Judge Morrison. Is everything all right? I need some discreet financial background work done. Very sensitive. Very confidential. Can you arrange a meeting? Absolutely. Should I schedule it at the courthouse? No, I said quickly. Somewhere private. This weekend if possible. The next morning, I played the role of loving wife with Academy Award-worthy precision. I made Derek his favorite breakfast, kissed him goodbye, and told him I hoped his sales call went well, all while knowing he'd be making a stop at Prestige Estate Buyers to fence my mother's tennis bracelet. From my chambers, I watched through the security app as Derek returned home during his lunch break. This time he selected my great-aunt's Art Deco ring, a stunning piece from the 1920s that was practically priceless due to its historical provenance. That was his mistake. That ring was special enough to be individually catalogued in my insurance records with detailed photographs and a complete provenance history. When it surfaced in the secondary market, it would be immediately traceable. I made a call to my insurance agent, claiming I wanted to update my jewelry coverage and needed current appraisal values. Within hours I had documented proof of the original value, and detailed descriptions of every piece in my collection, including several that Derek had already stolen. Friday evening brought another dinner performance. Derek was particularly amorous, suggesting we open a bottle of champagne to celebrate his successful week. I smiled and played along, all while calculating that his successful week had probably netted him around $15,000 from my stolen jewelry. You seem different lately, Derek said as we sat on our patio, sharing the champagne under the stars. More relaxed. It's nice to see. I nearly laughed at the irony. I felt more focused and energized than I had in months. There's something clarifying about discovering your life's purpose, even when that purpose is orchestrating someone's downfall. I've been thinking about our future, I said, which was technically true, about what we want our lives to look like in the next few years. Derek's eyes lit up. I've been thinking about that too. Maybe it's time for some changes. New adventures. New adventures. Probably funded by whatever remained of my jewelry collection. What kind of changes? I asked, genuinely curious about how far his delusions extend. Well, Derek leaned forward conspiratorially. I've been looking into some investment opportunities. High risk, high reward stuff. If they pay off, we could retire early, travel the world. You could step down from the bench and we could just live. investment opportunity. I almost admired his creativity in constructing cover stories for his criminal enterprise. In Derek's version of events, he was a savvy investor planning our golden years, not a thief systematically robbing his wife. That sounds exciting, I managed. What kind of I'm still researching, Derek said vaguely, but I've got some capital to work with now, more than I expected. Capital. My grandmother's necklace was capital, my mother's bracelet was capital, 23 years of marriage, and my husband had reduced my family's legacy to investment capital. Saturday morning brought my meeting with Marcus Chen, Rebecca's cousin, and apparently one of the city's most discreet private investigators. We met at a small cafe across town, far from anywhere Derek or his colleagues might frequent. Marcus was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in his profession, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, and he spoke with the precision of someone who understood the importance of detail. Rebecca gave me the basics, he said over coffee, but I need to understand exactly what you're looking for. I handed him a flash drive containing encrypted copies of everything I'd discovered so far. Financial investigation. I need to know where the money is going, who's receiving it, and if there are any other victims. Marcus plugged the drive into a specialized tablet and reviewed the files with professional efficiency. After several minutes, he looked up with raised eyebrows. This is very thorough documentation. You've essentially built half the case already. I'm a family court judge, I said simply. I understand evidence. Right. Marcus made some notes on his tablet. The financial pattern you've identified is clear, but I can dig deeper. Bank records, credit reports, asset searches. If he's got hidden accounts or other financial activities, I'll find them. What about the pawnshop transactions? Can you verify those? Absolutely. Prestige Estate Buyers keeps detailed records for insurance and tax purposes. I can probably get you photos of every piece he's sold, along with transaction dates and amounts. The thought of seeing photographic evidence of my stolen heirlooms being sold like common merchandise made my chest tight with rage, but I needed that evidence. How long will this take? 2 weeks for the basic financial workup, another week if we need to go deeper. Marcus closed his tablet and looked at me directly. Judge Morrison, I have to ask, are you planning to press charges? I met his gaze steadily. I'm planning to pursue every legal remedy available to me. Marcus nodded slowly. Then you should know that what you've already documented constitutes felony theft in this state. With the values involved and the systematic nature of the crimes, we're looking at serious prison time if he's convicted. Prison time. The words should have brought me satisfaction, but instead I felt a complex mix of vindication and sorrow. This wasn't how I'd imagined my marriage ending. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a separate envelope. I need surveillance on his activities while I'm out of town. I'm attending a judicial conference next week, and I suspect he'll accelerate his thefts while I'm away. Marcus accepted the envelope, which contained detailed information about Derek's schedule and habits. We'll have eyes on him the entire time you're gone. If he makes any moves, we'll document everything. Driving home, I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. In 2 weeks I'd have enough evidence to destroy Derek's life completely. His crime, his lies, his betrayal would all be documented in excruciating detail. But as I pulled into our driveway and saw Derek washing his car in the afternoon sun, waving cheerfully when he spotted me, I realized that the hardest part wasn't going to be gathering evidence. The hardest part was going to be continuing to live with him, continuing to pretend our marriage was real, while I systematically built the case that would send him to prison. Derek jogged over to my car, still smiling, still playing the role of devoted husband. How was your girl's lunch? Wonderful, I lied, accepting his kiss on my cheek. Rebecca sends her regards. Tell her thanks for keeping my wife entertained. Derek grinned. I worry you work too hard. As we walked into the house together, Derek's arm around my waist in a gesture of casual affection, I wondered if he'd ever actually loved me, or if I'd been nothing more than a convenient cover story for his real life. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. The investigation was underway, the evidence was mounting, and Derek Morrison was about to learn that there are some people you simply don't steal from, especially when one of those people holds the power to sentence you for your crime. The judicial conference in Denver was scheduled to begin on Monday. By the time I returned on Friday, Marcus would have a complete financial profile of my husband's criminal activities, and I'd have video evidence of whatever thefts he committed while I was away. Derek thought he was getting 5 days of unrestricted access to my jewelry collection. Instead, he was getting 5 days to hang himself with evidence that would be admissible in any court in the country. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for him to walk into it. The morning of my departure to Denver, Derek was unusually affectionate. He brought me coffee in bed, helped carry my luggage to the car, and kissed me goodbye with what seemed like genuine emotion. Standing in our driveway, watching him wave as I pulled away, I almost felt guilty about what I was orchestrating. Almost. "Have a safe flight, beautiful," he called out. "I'll miss you every second." Through my rearview mirror, I watched him wait until my car disappeared around the corner before heading back inside. The performance was over. Within minutes, I knew he'd be planning his week of unrestricted theft. At the airport, I activated Marcus's surveillance app on my phone. 3 different camera angles showed Derek moving through our house with purpose, already heading toward the bedroom. I forced myself to close the app and focus on my flight. Whatever happened over the next 5 days, I needed to maintain my own cover as an attending judge at a legitimate conference. The National Family Court Judges Association conference was being held at the Grand Hyatt in downtown Denver. Under normal circumstances, I would have been genuinely excited about the continuing education sessions and networking opportunities. Family law was evolving rapidly, and staying current with best practices was essential to effective judging. But these weren't normal circumstances. Every presentation on financial discovery in divorce cases felt like research for my own situation. Every discussion of marital asset division seemed personally relevant. I took detailed notes, but half of them were about strategies I could use against Derek rather than legal precedents for future cases. My hotel room had an excellent view of the Rocky Mountains, but I spent most of my time staring at my phone, monitoring the surveillance feeds from home. Marcus's team had been thorough in their preparation. The cameras captured every angle of our bedroom, and motion sensors would alert me to any activity in the areas where I kept my jewelry. The first alert came at 2:17 p.m. Mountain Time, just as I was settling in for a seminar on hidden asset discovery in high-conflict divorces. The irony wasn't lost on me. I excused myself to the restroom and opened the surveillance app. Derek was in our bedroom, but he wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize was with him, blonde, attractive, probably in her early 30s. She was standing at my jewelry box while Derek photographed her holding various pieces. My hands shook as I watched this stranger handle my mother's pearls, my grandmother's brooch, posing with them like they were props in some sick photo shoot. Derek was taking pictures from multiple angles, presumably for online auction listings or private sale negotiations. But who was she? An accomplice? A buyer? The surveillance audio was crystal clear, and their conversation made my blood freeze. "This necklace is gorgeous," the woman said, holding up my great-grandmother's diamond choker. "Are you sure Catherine won't notice it's missing?" "She travels constantly for work," Derek replied, adjusting his camera settings. "Half the time she doesn't even remember what she owns. Besides, she's in Denver all week." The casual way he discussed my absence, my supposed ignorance about my own possessions, was breathtaking in its cruelty. But it was what came next that made me grip my phone so hard I thought I might crack the screen. "When do you think you'll leave her?" the woman asked, moving to try on my mother's emerald earrings. "Soon," Derek said, zooming in on the earrings. "I've almost got enough capital saved up. Another few months of this, and we can disappear together, start fresh somewhere with no extradition treaties." No extradition treaties. My husband wasn't just stealing from me to fund some midlife crisis investment scheme. He was planning to flee the country with his accomplice, using my family's jewelry to finance their escape. I stumbled back into the seminar room, my mind reeling. The presenter was discussing the importance of early asset preservation in cases involving suspected financial misconduct. I wanted to laugh hysterically at the timing. That evening, I called Derek from my hotel room, maintaining the pretense of a loving wife checking in on her husband. "How's the conference?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar.
Educational, I said, which was true in ways he couldn't imagine. How are things at home? Quiet without you. I'm just catching up on paperwork, probably ordering takeout for dinner. The house feels empty when you're not here.
The lies flowed so effortlessly that I wondered how I'd ever believed anything he'd told me. While we spoke, I was watching the surveillance feed showing the blonde woman's jacket hanging in our hall closet. She was still there, probably helping him catalog more items to steal. I miss you too, I managed. Can't wait to be home. Just focus on learning and networking, Derek said. I'll be here when you get back. After ending the call, I sat on my hotel bed and stared at the surveillance footage. Derek and his accomplice were now in our living room, sharing a bottle of wine and looking through what appeared to be travel brochures. Our wedding photo sat on the mantel behind them, a mockery of everything I'd thought our marriage represented. The woman stayed the night. I forced myself to watch them move through my house like they owned it, discussing which of my possessions would be easiest to liquidate. At one point, Derek showed her my home office and I held my breath as they examined my legal books and case files. Think she suspects anything? The woman asked, running her fingers along my desk. Catherine? Derek laughed. She's completely absorbed in her career. Judges think they're so smart, but she can't see what's happening in her own house. I could probably steal her gavel and she wouldn't notice for months. The contempt in his voice was like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or even about leaving me for another woman. Derek actively despised me, my career, everything I'd worked to build. I'd been sharing my bed with someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome and a resource to exploit. I called Marcus's emergency line, my hands trembling with rage. I need you to identify the woman in my house, I said without preamble. Background check, financial records, everything. Already on it, Marcus replied. Facial recognition software flagged her when she first appeared on camera. Her name is Sophia Reeves, 32 years old, works as a travel agent at premier destinations downtown. More interesting, she's been planning international travel packages for clients paying in cash over the past 6 months. A travel agent. Of course. Derek hadn't just found a lover, he'd found a professional accomplice who could help him plan their escape. Sophia Reeves was probably expert at creating itineraries that would be difficult to trace, booking flights and accommodations that wouldn't leave obvious paper trails. How long have they been working together? Based on financial records, at least 8 months. She's been receiving regular payments from Derek, initially disguised as travel consultation fees, but the amounts don't match legitimate travel planning costs. 8 months. Derek had been planning this betrayal since before I'd even installed the security camera. While I'd been building a career, serving my community, believing in our marriage, he'd been systematically plotting to rob me blind and disappear with another woman. The next morning brought a conference session on judicial ethics in personal legal matters. The presenter discussed the challenges judges faced when their professional knowledge intersected with their personal lives, particularly in situations involving family legal issues. I took extensive notes, but not for the reasons the presenter intended. I was documenting the ethical boundaries I needed to maintain as I built my case against Derek. As a sitting judge, I couldn't preside over my own husband's criminal trial, but I could certainly ensure that the evidence against him was so comprehensive that any prosecutor would find it irresistible. The surveillance feeds continued to provide damning evidence throughout the week. Derek and Sophia made multiple trips to my jewelry box, carefully photographing and removing pieces. They researched travel destinations with no extradition treaties to the United States. They discussed timing for their departure, eventually settling on a plan to leave the country shortly after our anniversary next month. The cruelest part was watching Derek practice his performance for my return. Late Thursday night, with Sophia finally gone, he rehearsed his loving husband routine in front of our bedroom mirror. He practiced different ways of asking about my conference, different expressions of affection, different stories about how he'd spent his week alone. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I'd been his unwitting audience for months, possibly years. Friday morning brought the most devastating revelation yet. While packing Sophia's things from our guest room, Derek discovered a jewelry box she'd apparently brought with her. Inside were pieces I recognized immediately: my college sorority pin, a bracelet my law school roommate had given me, earrings from my first judicial appointment ceremony. Sophia hadn't just been helping Derek steal my current jewelry. She'd been storing previously stolen items at her apartment, creating an inventory of my life's most meaningful pieces. Items I'd thought were lost or misplaced were actually being warehoused by his accomplice, waiting to be converted to cash for their escape fund. I documented everything with screenshots and detailed notes, building a timeline that would be devastating in court. The systematic nature of their crimes, the planning involved, the interstate implications of their escape route, it all pointed to charges that would put them both away for a very long time. The conference ended Friday afternoon with a closing ceremony celebrating achievements in family law. I accepted an award for my work on domestic violence cases, standing at the podium and delivering remarks about the importance of protecting vulnerable family members from those who would exploit them. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. My flight home was delayed, giving me extra time to review everything Marcus's team had documented during my absence. Derek had stolen or prepared to steal nearly 60% of my jewelry collection in just 5 days. The total value exceeded $200,000, pushing his crimes well into federal territory. But more than the monetary value, he'd stolen pieces of my family's history, my grandmother's engagement ring, which had survived the Great Depression, my mother's graduation pearls, worn to every important event in her life, my great-aunt's Art Deco collection, representing an entire era of family elegance and grace. These weren't just valuable objects to Derek and Sophia, they were funding for a new life, built on the destruction of my old one. Landing in our city's airport Friday evening, I felt like I was returning to enemy territory. Derek would be waiting at baggage claim with flowers and his practiced smile, ready to perform the role of devoted husband, while his accomplice counted my stolen jewelry in her apartment across town. But I was ready for him now. The conference had given me more than continuing education credits. It had given me 5 days of damning evidence, and a crystal clear understanding of exactly how Derek saw me, our marriage, and my life's work. As I walked through the terminal toward baggage claim, I spotted Derek waiting near the arrival board. He was holding a bouquet of my favorite flowers, wearing the expression of loving anticipation he'd practiced in our bedroom mirror. The performance was flawless. Too bad for him that his audience was no longer the trusting wife he'd been stealing from. Judge Catherine Morrison was home, and court was about to be in session. Derek waved enthusiastically when he saw me, his face lighting up with apparently genuine joy. "Welcome home, beautiful. How was Denver?" "Educational," I replied, accepting his kiss and the flowers. "Very, very educational." As we walked to his car, Derek chattering about how much he'd missed me and how empty the house had felt in my absence, I calculated the timeline for the final phase of my plan. 2 weeks for Marcus to complete his financial investigation, another week to coordinate with law enforcement, then one final performance as Derek Morrison's unsuspecting wife, before I revealed myself as the judge who would oversee his complete destruction. The drive home was filled with Derek's carefully rehearsed stories about his quiet week alone. He'd worked late every night, he claimed, caught up on paperwork, missed me terribly, had barely left the house except for grocery shopping and his usual sales call. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. The difference was that only one of us knew the other one knew. "I'm exhausted," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "I think I'll go straight to bed." "Of course," Derek said solicitously. "You've had a long week. I'll bring your luggage up in a minute." I went straight to our bedroom, noting immediately that my jewelry box had been rearranged, pieces were missing, others had been moved, and the whole collection had an air of having been handled by careless fingers. Derek appeared in the doorway with my suitcase, watching me carefully as I approached the jewelry box. "Everything look okay?" he asked casually. I pretended to examine the contents, letting my expression show mild confusion. "I think, did you move anything while I was gone?" "Move anything? No. Why would I touch your jewelry?" The lie came so easily that I almost admired his skill. Derek had turned deception into an art form. I just thought, never mind, I'm probably just tired. Derek's relief was visible. "You work too hard, sweetheart. Get some rest. Tomorrow's Saturday, we can sleep in and catch up properly." As he left the room, probably to text Sophia about successfully deceiving me again, I opened my laptop and began uploading the week's surveillance footage to my encrypted file. Derek thought he'd pulled off the perfect heist while I was out of town. Instead, he'd just provided me with enough evidence to ensure his conviction on multiple felony charges. The trap was closing, and Derek Morrison had no idea that his loving wife was actually the judge who would soon be determining his fate. The weekend after my return from Denver was a masterpiece in psychological warfare, though Derek had no idea he was a combatant. I played the role of jet-lagged, slightly confused wife to perfection while methodically documenting every lie he told me about his week alone. Saturday morning brought the first test of our new dynamic. Over coffee and croissants, Derek regaled me with stories of his quiet week of solitude. He'd worked late every night, he claimed, caught up on sales reports, and spent Thursday evening reorganizing his home office. I even cleaned out that junk drawer in the kitchen, he said proudly. You know, the one that's been driving you crazy. I nodded appreciatively while internally noting that Thursday evening's surveillance footage showed him and Sophia sharing Chinese takeout, while researching flights to countries without extradition treaties. The junk drawer remained exactly as cluttered as it had been when I left for Denver. That's wonderful, honey, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. I've been meaning to tackle that drawer for months. Derek beamed at my praise, his eyes sparkling with what I now recognized as the satisfaction of successful deception. He genuinely enjoyed lying to me, took pleasure in my apparent gullibility. Sunday brought Marcus's first comprehensive report, delivered through an encrypted email that painted a picture of criminal enterprise far more sophisticated than I'd initially imagined. Derek's activities weren't limited to stealing my jewelry. Over the past 2 years, he'd been systematically defrauding his employer, submitting false expense reports, claiming fictional client entertainment costs, and manipulating his commission structure through phantom sales to non-existent customers. The pharmaceutical company he worked for had been unknowingly funding his criminal lifestyle to the tune of nearly $80,000 in fraudulent claims. Combined with my stolen jewelry, Derek had assembled a nest egg of almost $300,000, more than enough to disappear permanently with Sophia. But Marcus's investigation had uncovered something even more damning. Derek had been forging my signature on financial documents, using my judicial credentials to establish credibility with offshore banking services, and had already opened accounts in the Cayman Islands using falsified documentation that listed me as a co-signer. I stared at my laptop screen in my locked office Sunday evening, reading evidence that Derek hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been identity theft, financial fraud, and potentially international money laundering. The man I'd shared a bed with for 23 years was a career criminal who'd been using my reputation and position to facilitate his crimes. My hands trembled as I scrolled through copies of documents bearing my forged signature. Derek had been practicing my handwriting for months, perfecting it on what I'd assumed were innocent greeting cards and shopping lists. Every loving note he'd left me, every signature on anniversary cards, had been training for fraud. The offshore accounts were the final puzzle piece. Derek wasn't just planning to escape with Sophia, he was planning to frame me as his willing accomplice. If authorities ever traced the stolen money, they'd find accounts with my forged signature, documents that made it appear I'd been complicit in my own victimization. It was diabolical in its sophistication and absolutely devastating in its implications for my career. Even if I could prove the signatures were forged, the scandal would destroy my judicial reputation. Derek had crafted the perfect crime: steal from his wife while ensuring she'd be too compromised to seek justice. Monday morning brought a new performance. Derek kissed me goodbye with extra tenderness, claiming he had a big sales presentation that could secure his promotion to regional director. The promotion that would give us financial security for our retirement, he said. The promotion that would let us travel together, maybe even relocate to somewhere warmer. Through surveillance, I watched him drive directly to Sophia's apartment building. They spent 2 hours uploading high-resolution photos of my jewelry to multiple online auction sites, pricing pieces for quick sale rather than maximum profit. They were accelerating their timeline. I called in sick to court for the first time in 3 years, claiming I was still recovering from a conference flu. My clerk Rebecca expressed genuine concern, offering to reschedule my entire week if necessary. Just today, I told her, but Rebecca, I need you to research something for me. Hypothetically, if a sitting judge discovered evidence of crimes being committed against them personally, what would be the proper protocol for ensuring prosecution without ethical conflicts? There was a long pause. That's very specific, Judge Morrison. Are you asking hypothetically or research the protocols? I said firmly. I'll need a detailed memo by end of business. The rest of Monday was spent coordinating with Marcus and building what he called the anvil evidence, so comprehensive and ironclad that no defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. We had video surveillance, financial records, forged documents, witness statements from auction house employees, and communication intercepts between Derek and Sophia. But I wanted more. I wanted Derek to understand exactly how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered before I destroyed him. Tuesday brought the trap I'd been designing since Denver. I called Derek during his lunch break, timing the call to interrupt what I knew would be another visit to Sophia's apartment. "Honey, I have wonderful news," I said, infusing my voice with excitement. "Judge Patterson is retiring early, and there's talk about appointing me to the appellate court. The formal interview is Friday." The silence on Derek's end was telling. Through my phone I could hear Sophia's voice in the background asking who was calling. That's amazing, Kat," Derek finally managed. "Appellate court, wow. It would mean a substantial salary increase," I continued, "and much better retirement benefits. We could probably afford that house in Italy we've been dreaming about." More silence. I could practically hear Derek's mind racing, calculating how my promotion would affect his escape timeline. "When would you start?" he asked carefully. "If I get it, probably within 6 months, but honey, the interview process is very intensive. They'll be conducting detailed background checks on both of us, financial records, employment history, everything. They need to ensure there are no conflicts of interest or ethical issues." The intake of breath was sharp enough to be audible. "Background checks, on both of us, standard procedure for appellate appointments," I said smoothly. "Nothing to worry about. We've always been completely transparent about our finances." "Right," Derek said weakly. "Of course, transparent." After ending the call, I immediately switched to surveillance mode. Derek was pacing Sophia's living room like a caged animal, gesticulating wildly. As he explained the implications of my fictional promotion, Sophia's face had gone pale as Derek described the background checks that would inevitably uncover their criminal enterprise. They were panicking, exactly as I'd intended. Within hours, they'd made the decision I'd been hoping for. Instead of waiting until our anniversary to flee, they would accelerate their timeline to this weekend. Derek would empty the remaining valuable pieces from my jewelry collection Friday night, liquidate everything through Sophia's black market contacts over the weekend, and they'd be on a plane to the Cayman Islands by Monday morning. The rushed timeline was perfect for my purposes. Desperate criminals make mistakes, and mistakes create additional evidence. Wednesday brought Derek's most audacious performance yet. He arrived home early with champagne, flowers, and an elaborate dinner from my favorite restaurant. "We're celebrating your potential promotion," he announced, popping the cork with theatrical flourish. "I'm so proud of you, Kat. You deserve everything good that comes your way." The irony was so thick I could taste. Derek was literally toasting my success while planning to rob me blind and disappear forever. As we clinked glasses, I wondered if he felt any genuine emotion about leaving me, or if I'd been nothing more than a convenient resource from the very beginning. "I love you so much," Derek said during dinner, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "Whatever happens with this promotion, I want you to know that you're the most important thing in my life." I squeezed his hand and smiled, all while thinking about the offshore accounts he'd opened in my name, and the forged signatures that could have destroyed my career. "You're everything to me too," I replied truthfully. After all, he had become everything. My case study, my evidence, my pathway to justice. Thursday brought Marcus's final report and the coordination meeting I'd been anticipating for weeks. We met at a secure location downtown,
joined by Detective Sarah Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit, and Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen, who specialized in white-collar prosecution. "The evidence package is extraordinary," AD Chen said, reviewing the thick folders Marcus had prepared. "We've got enough for multiple felony charges: grand theft, identity theft, financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The federal implications alone could put him away for decades." Detective Williams was equally impressed. "The surveillance footage is particularly damning. We can see premeditation, systematic criminal behavior, and clear intent to flee prosecution. This is a prosecutor's dream case." "What about the accomplice?" I asked. "Sophia Reeves is equally culpable," Detective Williams replied. "She's been facilitating money laundering through her travel agency, helping establish offshore accounts, and actively participating in the theft conspiracy. We'll arrest them simultaneously to prevent either one from destroying evidence or fleeing." The timeline was set: Friday evening. After Derek completed what he believed would be his final theft of my jewelry, law enforcement would execute coordinated arrest. Derek would be taken into custody at our home, while Sophia would be arrested at her apartment where much of my stolen jewelry was being stored. But I had one final surprise planned for Derek, something that would make his arrest even more devastating than he could imagine. "There's one more thing," I told the assembled law enforcement team. "I want to be present when Derek is arrested." Detective Williams frowned. "That's unusual, Judge Morrison. Typically, we'd recommend the victim remain at a safe distance." "I understand the concerns," I said carefully, "but I want Derek to see my face when he realizes he's been caught. I want him to understand that his loving, gullible wife was actually the architect of his downfall." AD Chen leaned forward. "You're talking about a controlled revelation, letting him know that you've been aware of his crimes while he thought he was deceiving you." "Exactly. Derek has spent months, possibly years, believing he was superior to me intellectually. He's mocked my career, dismissed my intelligence, and treated me like a naive victim. I want his last moment of freedom to include the realization that he was outsmarted by the woman he thought he was exploiting." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about justice for Derek's crimes. It was about ensuring he understood the complete reversal of power that had occurred without his knowledge. "It's unorthodox," Detective Williams said slowly, "but it's not illegal. And frankly, given what he's put you through, I think you've earned the right to see his face when reality hits." Thursday evening. Derek was particularly affectionate, probably experiencing genuine emotion as he prepared to leave me forever. He cooked my favorite meal, played our wedding song, and spoke nostalgically about our early years together. "Do you ever think about how young we were when we got married?" he asked, as we slow danced in our living room. "How naive and hopeful." "All the time," I replied, which was true. I'd been thinking constantly about the innocent woman I'd been when I'd pledged my life to him, and how completely he'd exploited that innocence. "I hope you know," Derek continued, "that every day with you has been a gift." I pulled back to look at his face, searching for any trace of genuine remorse or conflict about what he planned to do to me. Instead, I saw only the practiced sincerity of a man who'd turned emotional manipulation into an art form. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day," he added softly. "Your interview, my sales presentation, both of us taking steps toward our future." Our future. In Derek's mind, his future involved disappearing with stolen money and a younger woman, while my future involved the professional destruction he'd carefully orchestrated through forged documents and identity theft. "I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings," I said, meaning every word. Tomorrow would bring Derek's arrest, the recovery of my stolen jewelry, and the beginning of a prosecution that would ensure he faced the full consequences of his crime. But more than that, tomorrow would bring the moment when Derek Morrison realized that his supposedly naive, trusting wife had been playing a much longer game than he'd ever imagined. The trap was set, the evidence was overwhelming, and Derek's final performance as my loving husband was about to come to a very dramatic end. As we went to bed, Thursday night, Derek's arm around me in what he believed was our last night together. I felt a complex mix of anticipation and sadness. Not sadness for Derek, who deserved everything that was coming to him, but sadness for the woman I'd been before I'd discovered his true nature. That woman was gone forever, destroyed as surely as Derek's life would be destroyed tomorrow. In her place was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that justice sometimes required patience, strategy, and the willingness to let your enemies believe they were winning right up until the moment they lost everything. Tomorrow Derek would learn that lesson the hard way. Friday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Derek hummed while making coffee, kissed my forehead tenderly, and wished me luck with my fictional appellate court interview. His performance was flawless, the devoted husband supporting his wife's career advancement, completely unaware that he was about to star in the final act of his own destruction. "I'll probably be home late tonight," he said, adjusting his tie in our hallway mirror. "Big client presentation, then drinks with the team if it goes well." I nodded sympathetically, knowing that his client presentation was actually a final meeting with Sophia to coordinate their weekend theft spree and Monday morning escape. The drinks with his team would be a farewell celebration of their successful robbery of his unsuspecting wife. "Don't wait up," Derek continued, grabbing his briefcase. The same briefcase that had carried my stolen jewelry to various pawnshops and auction houses over the past month. "But save some energy for tomorrow night. I thought we could have a special dinner. Celebrate your interview, whatever the outcome." A special dinner. Our last meal together, though only Derek knew it. The thought of him planning our final evening while secretly preparing to abandon me forever added another layer of cruelty to his deception. "That sounds perfect," I replied, accepting his goodbye kiss. "I love you. I love you too, Kat. More than you'll ever know." The words should have been touching. Instead, they felt like a mockery of everything love was supposed to represent. Derek's version of love involved systematic theft, identity fraud, and abandonment. It was a definition so twisted that it barely qualified as human emotion. After Derek left, I sat in our kitchen drinking the coffee he'd made me, and reviewing the final timeline on my phone. At 6 p.m., Derek would arrive at Sophia's apartment for their planning session. At 8 p.m. they would return to our house for the final theft operation. At 9 p.m., when Derek was knee-deep in stealing what remained of my most precious possessions, Detective Williams and her team would execute the arrests. The morning passed in a blur of nervous energy and final preparation. I met with A.D. Chen one last time to review the evidence package and sign the formal complaint that would initiate Derek's prosecution. The document was 63 pages long, detailing crimes that spanned nearly 2 years and involved enough money to qualify for federal charges. "Are you certain you want to be present for the arrest?" Chen asked again. "It's going to be emotionally difficult regardless of what Derek has done to you." I thought about the question seriously. Did I want to see the man I'd loved for 23 years being handcuffed in our bedroom? Did I want to watch his face as he realized that his loving wife had orchestrated his complete downfall? "I need to be there," I said finally. "Derek has spent our entire marriage believing he was smarter than me, more sophisticated, more capable of manipulation. He needs to understand that he was wrong about everything." Chen nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure you're protected and positioned where you can see his reaction without interfering with the arrest procedure." At 4 p.m., I received a text from Derek. "Interview going great. Think I nailed the presentation. Love you." The lies came so naturally to him that I wondered if he even remembered what the truth looked like. Through surveillance, I could see him at Sophia's apartment, loading the last of my stolen jewelry into traveling cases while she printed boarding passes for their Monday morning flight to Grand Cayman. They were giddy with excitement, celebrating their successful heist and planning their new life together. Sophia modeled my mother's pearl necklace while Derek counted cash from their recent sale. They toasted with champagne and talked about the beachfront condo they'd already rented sight unseen. The casual way they discussed my destroyed life, my missing family heirlooms, my inevitable professional ruin was breathtaking in its callousness. I'd been married to a sociopath who felt no empathy for my suffering, only satisfaction at his successful exploitation. At 5:30 p.m., I positioned myself in the surveillance van parked discreetly down the street from our house. Detective Williams had equipped the vehicle with multiple monitors showing every camera angle in our home, plus communication equipment to coordinate with the arrest teams. Both subjects are mobile, Williams reported as Derek and Sophia left her apartment building. ETA to your residence approximately 20 minutes. I watched the monitors as Derek's car pulled into our driveway at 6:47 p.m. Sophia had ducked down in the passenger seat to avoid being seen by neighbors. Another indication of how carefully they'd planned their crime.
They entered through our garage, moving with the confidence of people who believed themselves unobserved. Derek deactivated our basic alarm system, while Sophia headed straight for the master bedroom, already familiar with the layout from her previous visits. Audio is excellent, the surveillance technician noted. We're getting clear recordings of everything they say. What they said was damning beyond my worst expectations. As they began their final assault on my jewelry collection, their conversation revealed the full scope of their contempt for me and their crimes. She's actually excited about this fake promotion, Derek laughed, holding up my grandmother's diamond tennis bracelet, talking about better retirement benefits and financial security. If she only knew her retirement fund is walking out the door right now. Sophia giggled as she tried on my mother's emerald ring. Do you think she'll figure it out before we're gone? Catherine? Please. She's so buried in her legal books and court cases that she wouldn't notice if I painted the house purple. Judges think they're so smart, but they can't see what's happening in their own lives. The hatred in Derek's voice was shocking. This wasn't just criminal opportunism or a moment of weakness. Derek genuinely despised me, my career, and everything I represented. Our entire marriage had been a lie constructed around his resentment and superiority complex. Besides, Derek continued, photographing my great-aunt's Art Deco brooch, even if she does figure it out eventually, what's she going to do? Report her own husband? Admit that the brilliant Judge Morrison was completely fooled by a sales guy from the suburb. They both found this hilarious, laughing at my supposed arrogance and inevitable humiliation. Derek was counting on my professional pride to protect him from consequences, assuming I'd be too embarrassed to seek justice. It was the miscalculation that would destroy him. At 8:43 p.m., Derek made his final mistake. He picked up my mother's wedding ring, the one she'd worn for 47 years until her death last year. I'd kept it in a special box, planning to wear it myself when Derek and I renewed our vows for our 25th anniversary. This one's perfect for the private collector in Miami, Derek said, slipping the ring into his pocket. He pays premium for pieces with sentimental value. Apparently rich people love buying other people's memories. That was the moment I gave Detective Williams the signal. Execute the arrests, I said into my headset. The front door burst open simultaneously with the back door and garage entrance. Tactical officers flooded our house from 3 directions, shouting commands and establishing control of every exit. Derek and Sophia froze in our bedroom, Derek still holding my jewelry box while Sophia wore my mother's necklace. The expressions on their faces transformed from shock to confusion to growing horror as they realized the scope of what was happening. Derek Morrison, you're under arrest for grand theft, identity fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, Detective Williams announced, producing handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. This is impossible, Derek stammered, looking around wildly for an explanation. How did you were so careful? That's when I walked into the bedroom. Derek's face went through a series of emotions so rapid and intense that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. First came confusion as he tried to understand why I was there instead of at my fictional interview. Then recognition as he began to piece together what my presence meant. Finally, devastating comprehension as he realized the full scope of his situation. Hello, Derek, I said calmly, standing in the doorway of our bedroom as officers secured the crime scene around us. How was your day? Catherine, What? Derek's voice cracked as he struggled to form coherent thoughts. How are you here? Your interview? There was no interview, I said simply. There was no promotion. There was only you, stealing my family's jewelry while I watched through security cameras I installed months ago. The color drained from Derek's face as the implications hit him. Security cameras? But you said. I said many things, Derek. Just like you've been saying things to me for months. The difference is that everything I said was part of a carefully planned investigation into your criminal activities. Sophia tried to run for the bathroom, apparently hoping to flush evidence down the toilet, but officers intercepted her before she could destroy anything. She was crying now, makeup streaming down her face as she begged for understanding. We weren't going to hurt anyone, she sobbed. It was just jewelry, just things. Just things, I repeated, my voice hardening. My grandmother's engagement ring was just a thing. My mother's wedding ring was just a thing. You were selling my family's history to fund your escape, and you call it just things. Derek found his voice again, though it shook with desperation. Catherine, please, we can work this out. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. Really? I pulled out my tablet and showed him surveillance footage of his activities over the past week. This isn't you and Sophia stealing my jewelry. This isn't you forging my signature on offshore banking documents. This isn't you planning to flee the country with nearly $300,000 in stolen assets. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He'd been so confident in his superiority, so certain of his ability to manipulate me, that he couldn't process being completely outmaneuvered. You've been watching us, he whispered. For how long? Long enough to document every crime you've committed, I replied. Long enough to build a case that will put you in federal prison for the next decade. Long enough to understand exactly who I've been married to for 23 years. The officers finished securing the scene and reading both Derek and Sophia their rights. Evidence bags were being filled with my stolen jewelry, photographed and catalogued for prosecution. The carefully planned crime that was supposed to fund Derek's new life was being dismantled piece by piece. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Williams approached me with an evidence bag containing my mother's wedding ring. We'll need this for the trial, but I wanted you to see that we recovered it. I took the bag with trembling hands, looking at the ring my mother had treasured for nearly half a century. Derek had been planning to sell it to a private collector who specialized in pieces with sentimental value. The cruelty was almost incomprehensible. Catherine, Derek called out as officers prepared to transport him to booking. I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I was doing this for us, for our future. The audacity was stunning. Even caught red-handed with stolen property, Derek was trying to manipulate me into believing his crimes were somehow motivated by love. No, Derek, I said, meeting his eyes directly. You were doing this to us, to me, and now you're going to face the consequences. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, his expression shifted one final time. The desperation and confusion faded, replaced by something darker. For just a moment, I saw the real Derek Morrison, not the charming husband or the desperate criminal, but the cold, calculating predator who'd spent years viewing me as prey. You think you're so smart, he snarled, as officers guided him toward the door. You think you've won. But this isn't over, Catherine. I'll fight this. I'll expose you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of vindictive bitch you really are. The mask was finally off completely. This was who Derek had always been underneath the performances and manipulation. This was the man I'd shared my bed with, my dreams with, my life with. Actually, Derek, I said calmly, this is exactly over, and the only thing you'll be exposing is your own criminal behavior to a jury of your peers. After Derek and Sophia were transported to booking, I stood alone in our bedroom looking at the chaos they'd created. Jewelry boxes were overturned, dresser drawers had been ransacked, and evidence markers dotted the scene like yellow flowers in a crime scene garden. Detective Williams returned with a preliminary inventory of recovered stolen goods. We found most of your jewelry at Sophia's apartment, along with detailed sales records and photos they'd taken for online auctions. The evidence is overwhelming. I nodded, feeling emotionally drained despite my victory. What happens next? Arraignment, Monday morning. Both defendants will be held without bail given the flight risk and the federal charges. Your stolen property will be held as evidence until after the trial, but we documented everything thoroughly. As the police finished processing our house and departed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room where Derek and I had shared so many evenings together. The wedding photos on the mantel seemed to mock me now, reminders of promises that had been lies from the very beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news reports. Congratulations on a perfectly executed takedown. Derek Morrison will never know what hit him. I stared at the message, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and hollowness. Derek had been caught, my jewelry would be returned, and justice would be served. But the life I'd built over 23 years was gone forever, destroyed by a man who'd never actually loved me at all. Tomorrow would bring media attention, court proceedings, and the beginning of Derek's prosecution. But tonight, for the first time in months, I could sleep peacefully knowing that the thief in my bedroom had finally been removed. The game was over, and Judge Catherine Morrison had won decisive. But victory, I was learning, didn't always feel the way you expected it to. The weekend following Derek's arrest was a whirlwind of media attention that I hadn't anticipated. By Saturday morning, the story had broken in the local news with the sensational headline, "Family Court Judge's Husband Arrested for Jewelry Theft Ring." By Sunday, it had gone national. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from news outlets, legal analysts wanting expert commentary, and colleagues expressing shock and support. I declined all media requests, issuing only a brief statement through my court's public information officer. Judge Morrison is cooperating fully with law enforcement and will have no further comment while the criminal proceedings are ongoing. But the story had a life of its own. Social media was buzzing with speculation about how a sitting judge could have been so thoroughly deceived by her own husband. Legal blogs dissected the ethical implications of my involvement in Derek's investigation. True crime podcasters were already planning episodes about the Judicial jewelry heist. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek's final act of cruelty was generating exactly the kind of public embarrassment he'd counted on to protect him from prosecution. He'd assumed I'd be too proud to expose his crimes if it meant exposing my own apparent gullibility. He'd miscalculated again. Sunday evening brought an unexpected visit. My doorbell rang at 8 p.m., and I found Chief Judge Sandra Martinez standing on my porch with a bottle of wine and a grim expression. "I figured you might need some company," she said, holding up the bottle, "and some unofficial legal advice." Sandra had been my mentor since my first day on the bench 15 years ago. Her opinion mattered more to me than almost anyone else's in the legal community. We sat in my living room, the same room where Derek and Sophia had celebrated their criminal success just days earlier, and Sandra listened without interruption as I explained the entire investigation from beginning to end. "You documented everything?" she asked when I finished. "Everything. Video surveillance, financial records, communications intercepts, witness statements. The case is airtight." Sandra nodded slowly, swirling her wine. "The evidence sounds overwhelming, but Catherine, you realize what you've done goes far beyond building a criminal case. You've essentially conducted a covert investigation of your own husband while maintaining the facade of a normal marriage. That's unprecedented." I felt a flutter of anxiety. "Are you suggesting I've done something ethically problematic?" "I'm suggesting you've done something extraordinarily complex that's going to be scrutinized by every ethics board and legal review committee in the state," Sandra replied carefully. "The question isn't whether Derek deserved to be caught. He clearly did. The question is whether a sitting judge should have been conducting her own undercover operation." The weight of her words settled over me like a cold blanket. In my focus on catching Derek and building an unassailable case against him, I hadn't fully considered how my methods might be perceived by the judicial oversight committees that governed my career. "What are you thinking?" I asked. Sandra leaned forward, her expression serious. "I'm thinking you need the best legal representation money can buy, and you need it before Derek's arraignment tomorrow. Because this case isn't just about Derek's crimes anymore, It's about whether Judge Catherine Morrison acted appropriately when she discovered those crimes. Monday morning arrived with a media circus outside the courthouse that rivaled anything I'd seen in my 15 years on the bench. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered around every entrance, and photographers jostled for position to capture Derek's perp walk. I entered through the judge's private entrance, avoiding the chaos, but I could feel the weight of attention even in my chamber. My clerk Rebecca brought me a stack of messages from journalists, legal scholars, and ethics review boards, all wanting statements about my role in Derek's investigation. Derek's arraignment was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Judge Harrison's courtroom. As a sitting judge, I couldn't preside over my own husband's criminal case, but nothing prevented me from attending as a victim and witness. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecutor's table. When Derek was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, his eyes immediately found mine. The hatred in his gaze was so intense it was almost physical. Derek's attorney was someone I didn't recognize, a criminal defense lawyer from another county who specialized in white-collar crime. He was already working damage control, whispering urgently to Derek and reviewing thick folders of documents. "Your Honor," Ada Chen addressed Judge Harrison, "the people are seeking to hold both defendants without bail. Mr. Morrison and Reeves had concrete plans to flee the country, substantial liquid assets from their criminal enterprise, and no ties to the community that would ensure their appearance at trial." Derek's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, these charges are the result of an overzealous prosecution based on illegally obtained evidence. My client's own wife conducted covert surveillance of their marital home without his knowledge or consent. Any evidence obtained through this domestic espionage should be inadmissible." I felt my blood pressure spike. Derek's defense strategy was exactly what Sandra had warned me about, attacking not just the evidence, but my methods of obtaining it. Judge Harrison looked uncomfortable, clearly aware of the unprecedented nature of the situation. "Mr. Patterson, are you arguing that a homeowner cannot install security cameras in their own residence?" "I'm arguing that a sitting judge cannot conduct a covert criminal investigation of her own husband while pretending to maintain a normal marriage. The ethical violations alone should invalidate any evidence obtained through this deception." Ada Chen stood again. "Your Honor, Judge Morrison was the victim of ongoing felony theft. She had every right to protect her property and document crimes being committed against her. The fact that she's a judge doesn't diminish her rights as a private citizen." The legal ping-pong continued for 20 minutes, with Derek's attorney attacking my investigation methods, and the prosecutor defending both the evidence and my right to gather it. Throughout the arguments, Derek stared at me with undisguised malice, mouthing words I was grateful I couldn't hear. Finally, Judge Harrison ruled, "Bail is denied for both defendants. The flight risk is substantial and the evidence of planning to leave the country is compelling. As for the admissibility of evidence obtained by Judge Morrison, that's a matter for trial. This court makes no ruling on evidentiary issues at arraignment." Derek's face crumpled as the judge's words sank in. No bail meant he'd be sitting in county jail until trial, which could take months or even years depending on the complexity of the case. As Derek was led away, he turned back toward me one final time. "This isn't over, Catherine," he called out loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Everyone's going to know what kind of vindictive bitch you really are." Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. "Remove the defendant immediately." The outburst was perfect for Derek's legal strategy but devastating for his public perception. The courtroom was packed with reporters who'd just witnessed him calling his victim wife a vindictive bitch in open court. Whatever sympathy he might have garnered as a husband betrayed by his wife's covert investigation had just evaporated. Outside the courthouse, I was immediately surrounded by reporters shouting questions. "Judge Morrison, do you regret investigating your own husband? Was your marriage real, or just part of your investigation? Should judges be conducting their own criminal investigation?" I pushed through the crowd without comment, but I could see the headlines already forming. The story was evolving from "Judge Husband Caught Stealing" to "Dead Judge Cross Ethical Lines in Spouse Investigation."
Back in my chambers, I found a message waiting that made my stomach drop. The State Judicial Ethics Board was requesting a formal meeting to discuss my investigative activities and their compatibility with judicial standards. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday, just 3 days away. Sandra's warning had been prophetic. Derek's crimes were no longer the only issue at stake. My career, my reputation, and my future on the bench were all suddenly in jeopardy. I called the attorney Sandra had recommended, Margaret Torres, a specialist in judicial ethics who'd successfully defended several judges through misconduct allegations. Her office could see me that afternoon. Margaret Torres was exactly what I needed: brilliant, experienced, and completely unintimidated by the complexity of my situation. Her office overlooked the state capitol, and she'd decorated it with photos of successful cases and awards from various legal organizations. "I've been following your case since the arrest," she said without preamble. "It's unprecedented, which makes it both fascinating and dangerous from an ethics standpoint." She pulled out a thick file that was already labeled with my name. "The central question is whether you violated judicial ethics by conducting a covert investigation of your husband while maintaining your position on the bench. There are several potential violations we need to address." My heart sank, such as integrity and independence issues. Did your personal investigation compromise your ability to serve as an impartial judge? Conflicts of interest. Should you have recused yourself from all cases while conducting this investigation? And the appearance of impropriety. Does your conduct reflect poorly on the judicial system as a whole? Each potential violation felt like a nail in the coffin of my career. "What's your assessment?" Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Honest, your case is either going to set new precedents for judicial conduct or end your career. There's very little middle ground." She opened her laptop and pulled up several ethics opinions from other states. "The positive argument is straightforward. You were the victim of serious crimes and had every right to protect yourself and gather evidence. The fact that you're a judge doesn't strip away your rights as a private citizen." And the negative argument that judges are held to higher standards and can't engage in the kind of deceptive investigation you conducted. That your position gave you access to resources and knowledge that ordinary citizens don't have, creating an unfair advantage. That your actions compromise public confidence in the judiciary. I felt sick. In my determination to catch Derek and seek justice, I might have destroyed my own career. "What do you recommend?" Margaret closed her laptop and leaned forward. We argue that you acted within your rights as a crime victim, that your investigation was meticulous and legal, and that holding judges to a different standard would essentially make them second-class citizens in their own homes." She paused, then continued. "But Catherine, you need to understand that this fight could get very ugly. Derek's defense team is going to make you the issue, not his crimes. They're going to paint you as a vindictive spouse who abused her judicial position to orchestrate her husband's downfall. Is that what you think I did?" Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "I think you did what any intelligent woman would do when she discovered her husband was systematically robbing her. The fact that you did it with the thoroughness and precision of a trained legal professional just makes Derek's attorneys uncomfortable." Tuesday brought the first wave of editorial opinions about my case. The legal community was sharply divided. Some commentators praised my methodical approach to gathering evidence, and argued that judges shouldn't lose their rights as private citizens. Others criticized what they called vigilante justice and questioned whether I could continue serving on the bench. The most damaging piece appeared in the State Bar Journal, written by a retired appellate judge who'd always resented my rapid rise through the judicial ranks. His opinion piece was titled, "When Judges Become Investigators, a Dangerous Precedent," and argued that my conduct was incompatible with judicial service. Judge Morrison's elaborate deception of her own husband, regardless of his alleged crimes, demonstrates a willingness to manipulate and deceive that is fundamentally at odds with the honesty and integrity we expect from our judiciary. He wrote. The piece stung because it contained just enough truth to be credible. I had deceived Derek for months, maintaining the facade of a loving marriage, while secretly documenting his crimes. The fact that Derek deserved that deception didn't change the fundamental nature of what I'd done. Wednesday brought more troubling news. Derek's attorney had filed a motion to dismiss all charges based on what he called prosecutorial misconduct by proxy. The argument was complex but essentially claimed that my status as a judge meant that my investigation constituted unofficial law enforcement activity that violated Derek's constitutional rights. It's creative, Adia Chen told me over coffee, but it's also desperate. No court has ever ruled that a crime victim loses the right to gather evidence just because they happen to be a judge, but it creates more questions about my conduct, I observed. True, and Derek's team knows they're not necessarily trying to win the motion, they're trying to make you the issue instead of Derek's crimes. That evening, as I prepared for Thursday's ethics hearing, I received an unexpected phone call from Derek himself. Somehow, he'd managed to make a call from county jail. Catherine, his voice was different, subdued, almost defeated. I need to talk to you. Derek, you shouldn't be calling me. You have an attorney. Please, just listen for 1 minute. Against my better judgment, I stayed on the line. I know you hate me, Derek continued. I know I destroyed everything between us, but please don't let them destroy you too. What are you talking about? My attorney, he wants to make this about you, about your investigation. He thinks if he can get you removed from the bench, it'll help my case. But Catherine, you don't deserve that. You were protecting yourself from me. The admission was stunning. Derek was essentially confessing that his own defense strategy involved destroying my career. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause. Because, maybe, somewhere deep down, I do love you, and I can't watch you lose everything because of what I did. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, wondering if Derek's apparent moment of conscience was genuine, or just another manipulation. After months of lies, how could I trust anything he said? But his warning aligned with what Margaret had already told me. Derek's defense team was planning to make me the villain of this story, and tomorrow's ethics hearing would be their first major opportunity. As I went to bed, Wednesday night, I realized that Derek's arrest had been only the beginning of this battle. The real fight was just starting, and my career, my reputation, and my future were all hanging in the balance. Tomorrow, I would defend not just my investigative methods, but my right to seek justice when I'd been victimized by the person I'd trusted most. The irony was perfect and terrible. I'd spent months building the case that would destroy Derek, but in doing so, I might have built the case that would destroy myself. The State Judicial Ethics Board hearing was held in a sterile conference room that felt more like a corporate boardroom than a place where judicial careers lived or died. 5 ethics board members sat across from me at a polished mahogany table, their faces displaying the kind of careful neutrality that judges perfected over years of controversial cases. Margaret Torres sat beside me, her briefcase filled with precedents, legal opinions, and character references from 20 years of my judicial service. Across the room, the board's investigative counsel had prepared what looked like an equally thick file documenting my alleged ethical violation. Judge Morrison, the board chairman, began, "We're here to examine whether your investigation of your husband's criminal activities was compatible with your duties and obligations as a sitting family court judge." For the next 3 hours, I answered questions that dissected every aspect of my investigation. Why hadn't I immediately contacted law enforcement when I first suspected theft? Did I use any court resources or judicial privileges during my investigation? How could I justify maintaining a deceptive marriage while serving on the bench? The most challenging moment came when board member Judge Patricia Hendricks, "Judge Morrison, doesn't your conduct demonstrate a willingness to deceive and manipulate that's fundamentally incompatible with judicial integrity?" I took a breath and met her gaze direct. "Judge Hendricks, I was the victim of systematic theft by someone who had access to my home and my trust. I used legal methods to gather evidence of crimes being committed against me. If documenting criminal activity makes me manipulative, then every police officer, private investigator, and prosecutor in this state is equally guilty. But you're not a police officer," she pressed. "You're a judge. Don't we hold judges to a higher standard?" "We hold judges to higher standards in their professional conduct," I replied, but we don't strip them of their rights as private citizens. Derek Morrison wasn't stealing from Judge Catherine Morrison, he was stealing from Catherine Morrison, the woman who shared his home and his bed. That woman had every right to protect herself. Margaret presented our defense methodically, citing cases where judges had been involved in personal legal matters without ethical violation. She emphasized that I'd never used my judicial position inappropriately, never accessed court resources for personal use, and never allowed my investigation to interfere with my duties on the bench. The hearing concluded with the board retiring for deliberation. Margaret and I waited in an adjacent conference room, drinking terrible coffee, and trying to read the board members' expressions when they'd returned for clarification questions. How do you think it went? I asked. Margaret was honest. It could go either way. Judge Hendricks is clearly skeptical, but Judge Martinez seemed sympathetic. The others are harder to read. 2 hours later we were called back for the board's decision. Judge Morrison, the chairman, announced, after careful deliberation, this board finds that while your investigation methods were unconventional, they did not violate judicial ethics. You were acting as a private citizen, protecting yourself from criminal activity. Your investigation was conducted legally, without using judicial resources, and without compromising your ability to serve on the bench.
The relief was overwhelming, but the chairman wasn't finished. However, he continued, this board strongly recommends that in any future situations involving potential criminal activity, you immediately contact appropriate law enforcement, rather than conducting your own investigation. While your conduct was technically ethical, it created appearances that could undermine public confidence in the judiciary. It was a victory, but a qualified one. I'd kept my career, but with a formal recommendation that essentially told me never to do anything like this again. Outside the hearing, Margaret was more optimistic. A recommendation isn't a sanction, she said. You're free to continue serving, and the board's decision actually validates your methods. That's going to be helpful when Derek's case goes to trial. Derek's trial began 6 months later, after extensive pre-trial motions and plea negotiations that went nowhere. Derek's attorney had tried every possible strategy to exclude my evidence, arguing everything from spousal privilege to constitutional violations. Judge Harrison had rejected every motion, ruling that my surveillance of criminal activity in my own home was entirely legal. The trial itself was a media sensation. Court TV covered it gavel to gavel, legal commentators analyzed every development, and protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs reading everything from "Justice for Judge Morrison" to "Judicial overreach must stop." I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through my investigation from the first security camera notification to Derek's final arrest. The prosecution played hours of surveillance footage, showing Derek and Sophia systematically stealing my jewelry, discussing their escape plans, and mocking me for my supposed naivety. The most devastating moment came when Adia Chen played the recording of Derek's contemptuous comments about my career and intelligence. Hearing his voice again, dripping with disdain for everything I'd worked to build, was like reliving the initial betrayal all over again. Derek's defense was predictable but ineffective. His attorney argued that Derek had been driven to desperate measures by financial stress and marital problems. He painted me as a cold, calculating spouse who'd entrapped her husband rather than seeking counseling or communication. The strategy backfired spectacularly when Derek took the stand in his own defense. Under cross-examination, Derek's mask slipped again, revealing the same contempt and entitlement that had driven his crimes. "Didn't you tell Reeves that your wife was too stupid to notice her jewelry was missing?" Adia Chen asked. "I was frustrated," Derek replied. "Catherine was always so focused on her career that she ignored what was happening at home. So you decided to steal her family heirlooms to get her attention." Derek's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Derek's inability to take responsibility for his crimes, his continued attempts to blame me for his choices, and his obvious lack of remorse painted him as exactly the kind of defendant juries love to convict. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Derek was convicted of grand theft, identity fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Federal charges were pending for the interstate transportation of stolen goods and the offshore banking violation. At sentencing, Judge Harrison allowed me to deliver a victim impact statement. I'd debated whether to speak, but ultimately decided that Derek needed to hear the full scope of what he'd done to me and our family. Your Honor, I began, Derek Morrison didn't just steal my jewelry. He stole 23 years of my life based on a lie. He stole my trust, my sense of security, and my belief in the sanctity of marriage. He stole pieces of my family's history that can never be replaced, not because they were valuable, but because they were meaningful. I looked directly at Derek, who was staring at the defense table, unable to meet my eyes. Most devastating of all, he stole my faith in my own judgment. For months after his arrest, I questioned every decision I'd made, every relationship I'd trusted, every assumption I'd built my life upon. That theft of confidence and security may be the cruelest crime of all. Judge Harrison sentenced Derek to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. Sophia received 6 years for her role in the conspiracy. Both would be required to pay full restitution for the stolen jewelry and fraudulent activities. As Derek was led away in shackles, he turned back toward me one final time, but instead of the hatred I'd expected, I saw something that might have been regret. Or perhaps it was just the final performance of a man who'd built his life on deception. The aftermath of Derek's conviction brought unexpected consequences. The case had generated so much attention that I received speaking requests from legal organizations, women's groups, and victim advocacy programs. My story had become a symbol of how systematic abuse could be overcome through patience, intelligence, and careful documentation. More importantly, the changes in my court's procedures for handling domestic abuse cases had attracted national attention. Other jurisdictions began adopting our enhanced victim protection protocols, anonymous reporting systems, and coordinated response procedures. Derek's crimes had inadvertently led to reforms that would protect countless other victims. A year after Derek's sentencing, I stood in my bedroom looking at my jewelry box. Most of the pieces had been returned after the trial, though some would forever carry the memory of Derek's theft. My grandmother's necklace looked the same, but I'd never again wear it without remembering the surveillance footage of Derek photographing it for sale. I'd considered selling the pieces, donating them, or locking them away forever. Instead, I'd decided to keep them and wear them proudly. They were symbols not of Derek's betrayal, but of my resilience and my refusal to let his crimes define my life. The house had been harder to reclaim. Every room held memories of Derek's performances, Sophia's intrusions, and the months of lies that had filled our home. I'd considered selling it and starting fresh somewhere else, but ultimately decided to stay and rebuild the life I wanted, rather than running from the life I'd lost. The most unexpected development came 6 months after Derek's sentencing, when I received a letter from him in federal prison. After everything he'd put me through, Derek Morrison had one final surprise. Catherine, the letter began, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this away without reading it, but I need you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to you. Not sorry that I got caught, but sorry for the choices I made and the pain I caused. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Derek's participation in prison counseling programs, his growing understanding of the impact of his crimes, and his acceptance of responsibility for the destruction of our marriage. It ended with something I'd never expected to read. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty, respect, and genuine love. I hope someday you'll find those things with someone who's worthy of them. You're an extraordinary woman, Catherine, and I'm sorry it took prison for me to truly understand that. I read the letter 3 times, searching for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas, but it seemed genuine, and for the first time since discovering his crimes, I felt something like peace about Derek Morrison. Not forgiveness, that would take much longer, if it ever came at all, but peace with the knowledge that the man I'd loved had perhaps always existed somewhere beneath the criminal who'd betrayed me. 2 years after Derek's arrest, I was appointed to the appellate court I'd lied about being considered for during my investigation. The promotion was based on my judicial record, my handling of complex cases, and the national recognition my domestic abuse reforms had generated. It was ironic that Derek's fictitious promotion had become my real one. At the swearing-in ceremony, surrounded by colleagues, friends, and family, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Derek's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also revealed strengths I'd never known I possessed. His crimes had taught me about the depths of human deception, but they'd also shown me the power of patience, intelligence, and careful planning in the pursuit of justice. Chief Judge Martinez administered my oath of office, and as I raised my right hand to swear to uphold the law and serve justice, I felt the weight of everything I'd learned about both. Justice wasn't always swift or dramatic. Sometimes it required months of careful preparation, strategic thinking, and the willingness to endure betrayal while building the case that would end it. Derek Morrison had thought he was stealing from a naive, trusting wife who would never discover his crimes or fight back if she did. Instead, he'd chosen the worst possible victim, someone who understood the legal system, had access to resources he couldn't imagine, and possessed the patience to let him hang himself with his own evidence. In his final letter from prison, Derek had written that he hoped I'd find love again with someone worthy of it. What he didn't understand was that I'd already found something more valuable than romantic love. I'd found myself, my strength, my capabilities, and my absolute refusal to be anyone's victim. Standing in my new appellate chambers months later, looking out at the city where Derek was serving his sentence, and where I was serving justice, I realized that revenge truly was a dish best served cold. But the best revenge wasn't Derek's imprisonment, or the destruction of his life. The best revenge was the life I'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. A life where victims had stronger protections, where justice was served methodically and completely, and where Judge Catherine Morrison continued to serve her community with wisdom earned through experience. Derek had stolen my jewelry, but in doing so he'd given me something far more precious: the knowledge that I was strong enough to seek justice, smart enough to obtain it, and resilient enough to build something better from the wreckage of what I'd lost. Court was permanently in session, and justice, patient and thorough, would always prevail. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.